No, don't do that. I'm just a normal man, just like you. I'm not an everyday hero. I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. I'm not a hero. Don't say that. I'm just the founder of the Daniel Natal Show. This weekend, Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney was holding forth about the current political crisis, and in the course of doing so, mentioned what amounts to communist infiltration in our political system.
And then you just saw last week, a week ago today, where the two least likely people in the world won 2 Senate seats in Georgia. Both of them were either communists or socialists. So we now are going to have an inauguration of a person who everybody knows did not even run a campaign, didn't run on anything. And now we see he's putting in a bunch of left-wing communists in some of these billets.
This got me thinking about a conversation I just had with a young woman about communism. We were talking about how it's so odd that so many so-called progressives express strident enthusiasm for communism. Why this is strange is that it's contradictory. Progress means a going forward motion. You'd think that so-called progressives would be about new ideas, whereas communism is an ideology tied to the past. And I don't simply mean because Karl Marx is from the 19th century. Communism stretches back further than that, and it's in that sense tied to the Luddite movement that emerged in response to the Industrial Revolution. Let me start by saying that the young woman with whom I was speaking asked why we didn't ditch the money system altogether and revert back to bartering for things. I told her that economist Adam Smith said that bartering works for primitive societies, but that it breaks down in more advanced economies because there are too many transactions to make due to specialization. That is to say, in a primitive economy, like cavemen for instance, each man had to be self-sufficient. He had to be able to make his own hut, his own clothes, his own shoes, catch his own food, and so forth. He was so self-sufficient that he really didn't have too many additional needs, and because he was spending all his day hunting and boiling water, he didn't have too many surpluses anyway to trade. The agricultural revolution changed all that when it created all these surpluses for the first time. We added nitrates to the soil and did crop rotation and suddenly had 100,000 times more food than we had in the past. We couldn't eat it all, so we could trade it. Best of all, because it required only 1% of the population to farm, the other 99% could specialize in making shoes or candles or musical instruments or toys, etc. This generated even more surpluses. The thing about specialization, though, is now it makes you more dependent on other people for your necessities. Unlike the caveman, you no longer built your own house or made your own clothes or provided for your own food. Now you had to trade with others for these things. And that could really get complicated, as you can see here from this Econoclips video.
In a very simple economy, with very few goods, people can barter. But when the economy grows, barter trade becomes ineffective. A shoemaker sent his daughter Catherine to get a bag of wheat. The girl took the shoes and went to the farmer to propose a trade. The farmer agreed because he needed shoes, and so they exchanged. The next day, the shoemaker sent Catherine again to get another bag of wheat. But this time the farmer replied, "I'm sorry, I don't need a second pair of shoes, but I will give you wheat for a box of apples." So Catherine went to the gardener and proposed to exchange the shoes for some apples. The gardener replied, "I never wear shoes in the summer. I won't be needing them for at least 6 months. I can give you apples in exchange for new horseshoes for my horse, though." So the girl went to the forge, but the blacksmith said that he will give her horseshoes only for a new pair of trousers. Finally, the local seamstress agreed to exchange shoes for trousers. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end. It took Catherine half a day to find someone who needed shoes, but it took another half a day to finally get the wheat that she wanted. It's a little hard to do shopping this way, isn't it? Barter trade is ineffective and time-consuming. People need something that can be used as a medium of exchange, something everyone can accept. They needed money.
It's really hard to get off the money system once you're a highly diversified economy with a bunch of specialized people. Of course, I do see my friend's point in some of the evils of the money system too. I mean, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Alvin Toffler in the Third Wave talked about the bad habit of neoliberal crony capitalists going into developing countries to create new markets. This sounds like a lovely thing until you realize that what they're usually talking about is going into a poor country to install a dictator who then is bribed to force his people out of their villages to go and work in the mines to give silicon for Western cell phone companies. Up until the installation of the corrupt new regime, the people had been much more like Paleolithic man, making their own huts, catching their own food, making their own clothes. They were largely self-sufficient, hence outside the money system. After Western corporations came in and installed a brutal new dictator, these people were shunted from their villages and forced to work as slaves in the mines. Because the men were gone, there was no one to grow the food, whereupon Western corporations would say, "Great, now we can sell you food." But this will require money to buy the food. This is what creating new markets means. It signifies making people dependent on Amazon.com or Walmart or whatever. The villagers, of course, had no money for these things, so while Dad was in the mines making pennies, Mom had to go out to supplement their earnings with a job as a secretary or as a maid or something, which left no one to watch the kids. But that's all right, say the new colonialist corporations. We've set up new Western schools for your kids to teach them, as Toffler says, 3 new lessons: punctuality, obedience, and an ability to do repetitive tasks. No longer would the kids be taught their own history, heritage, or myths. All cultural transmission would be disrupted, the tribal system destroyed, but they would be taught about gay marriage and the importance of women in the workplace. The loss of people's culture and freedom might be said to be a tragedy to some, but to others it makes little difference, since the installed dictator promises to transfer the nation's natural resources to Western conglomerates at below market prices, so that your cell phone or computer is $300 cheaper. In discussing this with my friend, she said, "See, the money system does have bad effects." To this I conceded. She said, "It makes us all slaves. We have to do something. Maybe go back to bartering. It would destroy the central banker's hold over us. But to do this," I said, "you'd have to be self-sufficient like our ancestors. You'd have to provide for all your own needs." "Yeah, why not?" she said. Then it occurred to me. Her ideal society would be an Amish community. They evolved before the money system. Like in the agrarian period, they have all the farms that they need. They have tight-knit family structures and relatives who make all the products for consumption of the group. They have very little need for money, like medieval peasants who pay taxes not in cash, but in wheat. To this, my friend beamed. "That sounds awesome." I had to admit there were lots of psychological benefits for being outside the human zoo, as Desmond Morris calls our modern civilization. Morris pointed out all the mental illness that's generated by modern society, akin to how animals develop neuroses in zoos that they don't exhibit in nature. Only in the artificial environment of cages do they acquire psychological problems. Morris drew attention to how similar phenomena happen to people in cities. I mean, what are the rates of gender dysphoria among the Amish? What are their rates of cosmetic surgery? How many require ADHD medication or Xanax? How many have peanut allergies or are panicking right now over COVID? My friend was delighted at the idea of returning to this pre-money system. And then it occurred to me, so were the early communists, like Robert Owen in England in the 1700s. He arose at the very time period when the Industrial Revolution was destroying all the old jobs that the artisans had, with new machines coming in to make products cheaper and faster. This displacement led to the famous Luddite movement, where skilled craftsmen banded together to go around destroying the industrial machines to save their jobs. The Industrial Revolution also had destabilizing sociological effects. It drew young men away from the country to the cities to work in the factories for higher pay, thus dooming their old family farms out in the provinces. Though England was a flood in manufactured goods now, they soon had food shortages because no one was working the farms and people starved. As family structures also collapsed, grandparents no longer lived with their families on the farm along with cousins and aunts and uncles. All this broke down as people atomized and scattered. This led to loneliness and social dissolution. Robert Owen, the father of communism in the period before Karl Marx, wanted to turn back the clock and set up Amish-like communities to get out of the money system. He wanted people to share things among themselves and barter for goods. Owen went around setting up communities which failed one after the other. Eventually, he would move to America and try to establish a pre-industrial society there. It too failed. Nevertheless, I am sympathetic to some degree with this latent strain of traditionalism in these people. After all, they wanted us to go backward. A funny thing for progressives, if you think about it. Like Luddites, they yearn for a simpler, more primitive economy and social setup. To be fair, there are real advantages to strong family ties and having grandparents around to pass on wisdom to the young instead of just sending them off to nursing homes to die. The mental health that comes with this simpler life is also a great attraction. And then it struck me, you know who else tried to replicate an Amish lifestyle? The billionaire class. While they leave us in the human zoo, They themselves buy land far away from everyone else with rolling fields and horses. Whereas they would have us eat GMOs, they make sure that their families eat organic food. Whereas they encourage our kids to use social media and tech all day, they send their kids to Waldorf schools, which ban technological devices. By the way, it was just reported that Bill Gates now has the distinction of owning the most farmland in America. My point here is not to draw attention to the irony of progressives actually being regressives who want to take us back to the Luddite time period, nor is it to accuse the Amish people of being illustrative of communes that Robert Owen could only have dreamed about. It was rather to point out the strange similarity between the desires of early communists and the current billionaire class. I mean, look at steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie. He only arrived in America as a boy because his Scottish father was displaced by the factories which supplanted his job as an artisan. Carnegie, though, becoming one of the richest men in America, still harbored secret Luddite sympathies. People often think of this oligarchical class as being mutually opposed to the aims of communism, and are shocked when they see billionaires funding radical groups and socialist organizations. But really, there's a certain logic to it. While we are encouraged to break up our families and turn increasingly to mentally unhealthy transhumanist lifestyles, the rich behave very much like people from the agrarian time period. Fresh air, wide spaces, and a highly nepotistic family-based community structure. Like a mafia family in a sense. Mafia families are organized much like the old farming families from the pre-industrial period, with the father at the top of the corporation and aunts, uncles, cousins, and brothers all engaged in the family business, like good old George Soros and his son, or the Bushes. Maybe in erecting this quasi-communist social setup in their great reset, they're tipping their hand more than you know. Maybe in pushing Agenda 2030, gutting America's industrial base and turning us back into a neo-feudal agrarian plantation, they're telling you what their real values were, all along. Before you is a moral puzzle. If you push this button, something advantageous will happen for you. But be warned, if you do, a pompous elitist who you do not know and who you will never meet will be heckled mercilessly. The choice is yours. Choose wisely.